Thank you for joining me for this evening's webinar, Stop the Self-Sabotage. So my name's Beth Wood and I'm one of the directors of Mind Fitness Training. And Mind Fitness works in organisations throughout the UK and also with individuals in public sessions and public events. And then we have teams of people who work in schools, and that's on 3 projects that's funded by Children in Need. We have another director who is called Brian. These are the 3 of us here. So Andy heads up the mental health side of the operation. I head up the well-being and cognitive training, and Brian heads up the business skills or personal effectiveness. And everything we do is done through the lens of neuroscience. And we also use the medium of creative learning, because we know that to build neural pathways between our prefrontal cortex, our higher thinking brain, and our neocortex, which is the home of most of our imagination, is just about one of the best things we can do for good mental health. We have our marketing team, and that is Irem on the left and Erin on the right. And then we have a team of practitioners who work with us in schools and sometimes also in corporates. We wrote a book last year, which is called Unlock You, and we're very excited as in August and September of this year, it was Business Book of the Month at WH Smith, which is brilliant. And then we have an app, Tembo, which I'm just going to talk about for a minute because I'm going to reference it a few times as we go through. So before going into lockdown, we had a minimum viable product. The app was at MVP stage and it was being trialed by corporates. And then when lockdown happened, we pivoted and changed it so that it was for everybody and it was a free app, and put on lots and lots of exercises that we would hope would help people in the current situation. So really the app is for 3 things for us. As we said, it's absolutely free. It's to extend our reach to try and get to people that we wouldn't be able to get to otherwise. It's to be able to get to people 24/7. And we really have found that that's incredibly useful, especially with the people that we coach. And it's as a sort of value added in the work that we do with corporates and also on training courses and webinars and things like this, because I can give you the information through the webinar and then I can ask you to sort of follow it up and do exercises from Tembo. So tiny bit of practical. If you haven't done these webinars before, they last for an hour. After that, I'll do a question and answer. So if you have any questions, please could you leave them in the chat function rather than the Q&A, so then I've just got one place to look at the end of the session. And I'm very happy to answer any questions personally. I'll email you back. So if you'd rather that I did that, please just leave me your email address. That's brilliant. And finally, grab a piece of paper or something to write on if you haven't already got one. Because I will be setting you little tasks to do as we go through the session. So this is our sort of content outline for today. A little bit on context, then a section on why we self-sabotage, and that's really around the science. Then how we self-sabotage, and that's looking at the most common ways that we self-sabotage. And then at the end, 3 techniques that you can put into practice really quickly, straight away, and then a conclusion. So, starting with context, and in my experience, everyone has the sense that they could be something more, that they could be someone more. So, in my experience, almost everybody has the sense that they could be something more, that they could be someone kinder, that they could achieve more. And I would say that's definitely true. And that tapping into that hidden potential, that hidden resource, is more than anything about stopping the self-sabotage. So that's really important. I'm going to start off by just talking for a minute about awareness. So there are some kinds of self-sabotage that almost certainly you'll be aware that you do already. I just want you to make a note of the forms of self-sabotage, the behaviours that you are already aware of, that you know that you do. And now underneath that, there'll also be other forms of self-sabotage that are lurking perhaps just underneath the level of awareness. And then still others that are deep-rooted, deep-seated down in your unconscious thinking. And what we're going to do this evening is to look at ways that we can bring them up to the surface and tackle them. But before we do that, it's just to think about the scale first. So there are some people, lots of us, who self-sabotage at a relatively low level. So it might mean that we don't live as happy a life as we might, or that we don't achieve the potential that we could. But other people will be experiencing a much more extreme form of self-sabotage, and that will be resulting in clinical depression and clinical anxiety, an inability to get through trauma and to release negative emotions. So we, almost all of us, know somebody that self-sabotages at that level. So I want you just to think for a moment of anyone you know that self-sabotages in that way. And if you can, just to get a sense of the life that they're living now and the life that they could be living if they manage to stop the self-sabotage. It's a really interesting juxtaposition. The next thing just to mention is consistency. So, stopping the self-sabotage, I would say, is very largely about applying consistency to your thinking. It's really easy for us to get very excited about our new positive beliefs and to know that we felt them and then not realize that we've, after that, slid down into the negative mindset. So I have a lot of people that I coach that say, yeah, but I did the exercises, and then don't realize that they've spent the next 4 or 5 hours, thinking negative thoughts. So, we wouldn't expect to be able to stick to a diet for 2 hours a day and then eat burgers and chips for the rest of the day and still lose weight. And yet we often do that with our mindset. So it's really making sure that we build that kind of awareness that is leading to consistency of thinking. Next thing I'd like to just briefly touch on is stepping away from the 24/7. It's one of the ways that we so strongly self-sabotage. We live in a world that's very full on. We grasp and we cram stuff in, and we give ourselves very little space in which we can possibly make the changes that we need to make. So within Mind Fitness, the thing that we use to buy us that space is mindfulness. So some of you will have been on previous webinars where we've looked more extensively at mindfulness, which we're not going to do today. But it's just remembering that it's bringing your attention to the present moment in order to experience life more fully and more clearly. And I'm going to do just a tiny, very short mindfulness exercise called STOP. It's a mnemonic, so it's really easy to remember. S stands for stop, T, take a breath, O for observe, and P for proceed. So I'd like us just to do it together. It's invented by UCL, about a 6-second exercise, I think it is. So stop, whatever you're doing, in this case, processing the information. T, take a breath. So always in through the nose and out through the mouth to bring the heart rate down quickest. O is for observe. So just observe anything that you can see around you. Try and look in detail. It's your senses that will bring you back into the present moment as well as the breath. So have a look at whatever you're looking at. Look at the shapes and the shadows and the textures. Try and really assess the detail. Just a few seconds and then proceed. So back to processing the information. So it's a really quick exercise, and it's a great one if you're walking along as well, because you can literally just stop, take the breath and carry on. In tempo, I would ask you to have a look at an exercise called Walking on Water. It's a guided meditation exercise, and it's particularly good for that stepping away from the 24/7, from the clutter. In that space, we will stop defending, we'll stop reenacting our self-sabotaging behaviors, and it's the space in which we can learn new behaviors and embed them in. Really important. Next thing I'd like to talk about is perception. And perception really is key to the whole mind fitness process, and definitely one of the most important things in terms of giving up the self-sabotage. So, perception is very closely linked to beliefs. We don't believe what we see what we believe. So I'm going to give you an example, which is that wonderful advert, and I can't remember at all what it's an advert for, but it was someone on the tube and they were knocked in the back and got very irritated and assumed it was an umbrella or bag or something, turned around and saw that it was an unsighted person who obviously done it accidentally. And in a moment, the irritation goes, doesn't it? What we see is filtered through our perception, and our perception is rooted in our beliefs. So we'll be coming back to the idea of beliefs a lot of times sort of through this. But I suppose I just wanted to mention it here because I think it's very much part of why it's difficult to change. Why you have to be really willing to change, because you have to be willing to see yourself and the world and the people you care about through new eyes. You have to be able to perceive your life in a different way, and that's sometimes not easy. But I would definitely say, especially in terms of stopping the self-sabotage, it's absolutely worth it. The rewards are absolutely huge. We don't have to dwell in our drama. We absolutely can move on. And it's just remembering, it's your choices and your decisions that are responsible for the quality of your life. So we're going to move now into the why we self-sabotage, and this is a really quick whisk through the sort of science of it, the brain facts, very, very quickly. And then as we go through, I'll give some ideas of how we can stop as well. So the first one to look at is just fight and flight. I'm sure everyone will know this, but in your brain, if you went in through the ears and through the eyes, you come to two tiny pieces called the amygdala. And the amygdala has two jobs to do. In the normal circumstances, what it does is it passes information up to the prefrontal cortex, a higher thinking brain. But in stressful situations, so when there's either danger or perceived danger, very importantly, what it does is it kicks in your fight or flight. And the most important thing to remember is that when it does that, when fight or flight has kicked in, it stops passing any information up to your higher thinking brain. So that's why your mind goes blank in those really stressful situations. At the time when you most need to be thinking clearly, decision making, problem solving, you literally can't. So having techniques to get yourself out of fight or flight, and I would certainly recommend mindfulness, is really important. The second thing is noise. So these are the ways, if you like, that our brain, because of the way we're wired, trips us up. So we have 60,000 thoughts a day. Only 5% are spent on the task in hand. Actually, some scientists are saying 80,000 now. 5% spent on the task in hand, and the rest is noise. And there's all different kinds of noise. So past noise is where we keep reenacting in our minds what's happened in the past, even though we can't change it. And in extreme cases, that will lead to depression. Future noise is where we create mental movies of the potential futures, usually negative and usually increasingly negative for reasons we'll talk about later. And all of those are the noise in our mind. And the noise is created by automatic negative thoughts. Andy and I call them the ants. So, what happens is that one automatic negative thought will lead to the next, will lead to the next, will lead to the next, and you go down that spiral. And before you know it, you're way down the rabbit hole, you've lost 10 minutes and you're feeling really terrible. So in terms of stopping the self-sabotage, yeah, as it says, don't let the ants steal your brain. And we'll talk about that as we go through. It's really getting to recognize that first automatic negative thought. Don't let it catch. Don't let yourself go down the spiral. So again, that can be from using a mindfulness exercise, or there's a very quick exercise which is called catch and throw, which is brilliant, where you become aware of the negative thought and you just catch it in your hand. So you might say, I'm not as good as everyone else in my team, and you turn it and you throw it, and as you throw it, you turn around the thought, or you turn around your perception. They hired me because they think I'm good, and I've done pretty okay so far. So that's a really nice, easy technique to use. The third thing in terms of the way our brain operates and why we self-sabotage is threats and rewards. So our brain works on a system of threats and rewards, and it will always head over to the threats because that's linked to survival instinct. Unless we pull it, we find ways to pull it across to the rewards. And linked to that is cognitive bias. So you've probably heard of cognitive bias, sometimes called thinking errors or cognitive distortions. And I suppose the most important thing to say first is that, it isn't errors in your thinking, it's just the way the human brain works. And thinking errors are habitual patterns of thought that will seem to you right and true, but are in fact based on false logic. And they happen because the brain has so much information to process when you want an answer or a decision, you're trying to make a choice, and all it can go on is past experiences. And because of the way it works, for two reasons, it's likely to draw on negative experiences. The first one is threats and rewards that we already mentioned. And the second one is because it gives more weight to any experiences that have an intense emotion attached to them. And sadly, we have more intense negative emotions than positive ones. So for those reasons, your brain will head towards the negative and you won't know that it's happened. It's, these biases, which are essentially negative slants on the world that would never be borne out by evidence, become stronger in terms of crisis. So it's why it's such an important one at the moment. And they become major symptoms in acute depression and anxiety. It's also why we're much more likely to identify with our failures than we are with our successes. And the vast majority of cognitive bias or thinking errors are unconscious, but we can gradually bring them up to the level of through being aware to consciousness. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to list, excuse me, the most common forms of thinking error. I'm going to tell you the name of it, then give you a very brief description and a tiny example. And as we go through this list, I'd really like you to think about which ones you most fall prey to. And then at the end, I'll give you a technique to challenge them and to change them. So it's good when I give you the technique, if you're particularly thinking about one of them, then it will make have the biggest impact for you. So first one, all or nothing thinking. So that's sometimes called black or white thinking. It's when there's no grey areas, not even moral grey areas usually. And an example would be someone saying, there's no point in even starting this because I can't finish it. Second one is overgeneralization, actually much more common than we think. Listen out for it. And it's where we take an isolated event or a single case and we expound it into a universal conclusion. And we end up saying something like the whole project is hugely disappointing. Probably not the whole project. The next one is mental filters, and that's where we magnify the negative and discount the positive. And again, it's a very common thinking error. So an example might be, the boss didn't like my presentation, probably no one liked my presentation, and we'll all know the feeling, won't we, where we've done some kind of a presentation and 50 people said they liked it, and 5 people said they didn't, but we focus on the 5 all the time. The next one is labeling and mislabeling. And this is an important one because we often attach quite a lot of emotion when we label someone, say an idiot, either ourselves or somebody else. And as soon as we've labeled that person, then our brain will start to believe it. So it's really something to avoid if you possibly can. So the example would be, you know, I really messed up that presentation. I'm a complete idiot. The next one is emotional reasoning. And it's, again, we've found that it's a very common at the moment because emotions are running high. And what happens with emotional reasoning is that when we feel something strongly, it convinces us that it's true, just the way our brain works. If we feel something strongly, we believe that it's true. So I feel it leads to I know it. You know, it's how we become convinced of things that are often not the case. And my example would be, I'm so worried about my team's results, I know they're going to be disastrous. Next one is personalization, and that's where we see ourselves as the center of the universe and responsible for events that are nothing to do with us. And I would definitely say that taking things personally, criticism personally, is one of the most common causes of unhappiness and actually of low-grade work, you know, because we need to be able to criticize ourselves and be criticized in order to really progress. And my example is, I know she said the whole team, but I'm sure she was looking at me. Low frustration tolerance. Interesting, this one, I think, in the current situation, because I think we've actually had quite a lot of high frustration tolerance as well. So low frustration tolerance is where we think we can't cope at all unless the world is exactly as we want it. Phrases like I can't stand it or I can't bear it. But we actually had a lot of people who wouldn't have been able to stand waiting in queues doing it for some time, didn't we, earlier on in the lockdown. And my example is, I can't stand it when they don't trust us to do the work. And the last one, awfulizing. So we all pretty much have a tendency to think of things as more awful than they are. Obviously, there are some serious things, but we tend to pull the trivial ones up to the level of the most serious problem that we have at the time. So we always say, you know, how awful is it really on a scale of 1 to 10? So my example would be, I've lost my phone. It's a nightmare, you know, complete disaster at the end of the world, you know, and losing your phone on a scale of 1 to 10 can feel like a 10. But if we measure it against some of the really serious things that are happening at the moment, you know, it's probably a 2 or a 3, something like that. So they're the thinking errors. And I'm just going to talk you through the 4-stage process of challenging them down. So the first stage is awareness. And to some extent, it's literally just being aware that even though what you're feeling thinks, you know, you feel it's right and true, that it might not be logical, helpful, you know, and it may be false. So just even that is the beginning of the awareness. Labeling is where we go in specifically, and that's why I've listed the thinking errors. Go in specifically and start to determine which ones you fall prey to most, and to try and really look at them in detail. You know, if you know it's low frustration tolerance, when you've labeled it, you can start to feel it coming even before it arrives, which is, it's great. The next one is monitoring, again, which will help with that, which is where you write down when it's happening and why it's happening, and then you can start to see patterns and triggers. And again, you can start to fend it off before it arrives. And then the last one is reframing. Sometimes you don't even need to get to that when you've gone through the stages, but reframing, there's a lovely exercise here, which I'm going to tell you. So just jot it down and do it later, if you possibly can, on one of the thinking errors. So choose a thinking error. And then the first thing you're going to do is write an example like the ones that I used. So an example might be, the IT manager is an absolute idiot. He showed me up in front of the boss. And then what you do is you write an example of the absolute opposite. So you're forcing your brain to think in the opposite way. So you might say, IT manager is an absolute gem, saved me in front of the boss the other day. And then you write a third statement, which is a halfway house. So it's a sort of compromise. So you might say, I have had a few problems with the IT manager, but I must say she did step in when she was really needed the other day. So you get your brain used to seeing it in those three ways, and it's a really useful exercise. So that's the why we self-sabotage in terms of our brain, and just a few quick techniques that you can start to use. And now we're going to move into the how we self-sabotage, the most common forms of self-sabotage that Andy and I have come across in our training. So the first things I'm going to look at two things that are to do with stress, because I think they're so key at the moment in terms of people's problems and what they're not coping with. Stress levels, anxiety levels, really high, as I'm sure you're aware. So the first one is thinking about our stress container. So our stress container, of course, obviously it's a metaphorical stress container. We don't really have one. Has the stressors coming in at the top, and then at the bottom there is a tap, and that's your healthy coping mechanisms, the way that you're releasing the pressure in that stress container. So just make a quick note of it, and then after the session, have a think about what the stresses are that are coming down, and think about how effectively you're opening the tap at the bottom. So that might be all of the things that we're doing in the Mind Fitness training, but it might be connections with people. It could be eating well, sleeping well, exercise, whatever, music, creative work, anything which you think is your healthy coping mechanisms at the bottom. And I would say, you know, we self-sabotage because we let too much stress in, but actually more than that, we self-sabotage because we don't know the state of our stress container at any time. And I would say being aware of it is absolutely key. The whole of the process that we do is about enlarging that stress container, just so that you've got, you know, not enlarging the stress in it, just the container, so that you've got a little bit of space at the top, which buys you contingency. And then if something unexpected happens, like happened to us all in March, you know, and there's suddenly a lot more stress coming in than we'd expected, it buys you a little bit of time before, you know, while you build up the coping mechanisms at the other end in order to deal with it. So stress container, very important. Second one is the buzz burden curve, and that's also related to stress. So along the bottom line, you've got stress, and then up the side, you've got performance. So we tend to think that all stress is bad, but obviously we need an amount of pressure, motivation, in order to help us to achieve our potential and to work at our peak performance. So I would say almost all of us self-sabotage by not keeping us on the line, the peak performance, sometimes called the optimal performance line, that goes straight up the middle. So on the left, you've got too little pressure. On the right, you've got too much. And you know, you're not going to keep yourself completely on the line, but just a few degrees either way makes a phenomenal amount of difference. At the moment, a huge amount of people have gone into that left-hand side, the under pressure side of the buzz burden curve. You know, people that have been made redundant, people that have been furloughed, and you know, a lot of those people that are really suffering are people that are highly motivated people that just literally do not know how to cope in these circumstances. So that's sometimes called rust out as opposed to burnout on the other side. And it's where we don't have enough motivation and focus. Past the top, coming down the red hand side, we've got the too much stress. And it's really easy for us to go past that line and not realize that we have. So when you're at the top, you're likely to be in flow. Time is passing very quickly. You feel easy. There's a kind of grace about life that that is really makes everything feel so much more connected. I would say, for me, certainly more connected. And we hold on to that, and we don't want to let it go, and so we don't want to stop. But actually, it's really important to stop, because if you slide down the other side, then that leads to chronic ill health, both physical and mental. So keeping yourself at the top is critical, and we self-sabotage when we allow ourselves to go too much in either direction. The next way that we self-sabotage is when we employ negative or unhelpful thinking. And this is really at the key, the very heart of the mind fitness process. So we have a slide that we use a lot, which is our stress and disturbance doesn't come from the event or situation, but from our response to the event. So if you're not familiar with that, just read it through one more time. It's incredibly powerful, because it means we can choose the way that we respond to any situation, but we self-sabotage so much of the time by responding in a way that doesn't help us and sometimes harms us. So being aware of the way we respond and making sure that we respond as positively as we can is absolutely key. So I'm going to give you a little task to do. I'm going to give you a situation. I'd like you to imagine that you work for a company. You've been working on a presentation with your boss for the last couple of months, and your boss is due today to deliver that presentation at a huge national conference. And then she phones you and she says she's really ill and she's very sorry, but you're going to have to take the presentation, to actually do the presentation. And I'm going to ask you first to give a non-resilient response. So just spend a minute writing down what your response might be, the end of the world, non-resilient response to the situation. I'm just going to give you a moment. And you can come back to it at the end if you need to write more. And now you're going to do the opposite. You're going to write down the resilient response. You're going to write down, it might not be perfect situation, but the way you respond is positive. So half a minute just to write down your resilient response. Brilliant. And it's really just to illustrate that it's not the event that determines the consequences, but our beliefs about the event. If you wanted to, after this webinar, perhaps think about what the different beliefs would be from the non-resilient presenter and the resilient presenter. It's our beliefs about the situation that lead to the consequence. And if we can change our beliefs, then we can change the consequence. Beliefs really are everything. If you have the right beliefs, then you can learn the right stuff and find the right strategies. But without the right beliefs, you'll always be self-sabotaging. It'll always feel like an uphill struggle, a battle for you. And we need to also think of the limiting beliefs that we have that are stopping us from even trying sometimes. But certainly from achieving. We all have a whole set of beliefs that undermine our resilience. So I'm going to put a slide up, and I'd like you again just to have a look at everything here. I'm not going to read it through. And think about any of these which you fall prey to. There's a lot of very common ones here that I'm sure you'll recognize, both from yourself and from other people. Yeah. And then during, the next week or two, also have a think about what specific beliefs you have that will be undermining your resilience. and then it's always about swapping it out. Try and think about, because as well as that, you're going to have a whole heap of positive beliefs that you're probably not using at all, that you can optimize. Make sure that you write them down. Think about what positive beliefs you have, and they're there for you when you need them. The next way we self-sabotage, next thing we're going to talk about, is when we're not able to control or manage our emotions. So tiny bit of about the science. So, we are essentially an organic computer, 100,000 chemical reactions per second. And an emotion happens when a chemical or compound of chemicals is released through our body. So cortisol, for example, is the stress hormone. And that will be what goes up hugely in situations of danger, perceived danger, stress. There are some happiness hormones. So dopamine is the sort of spiky high chemical. Serotonin, much more contentment level high chemical. Oxytocin, important one at the moment. It's sometimes known as the cuddle hormone, and it's what we get if we stroke a pet or kiss a loved one, hold somebody, and it's the thing that so many elderly people, especially in care homes at the moment, are just not getting, which is really important. So when we change the way we think from negative to positive, essentially we release a whole set of different chemicals through our body, which means that we feel much happier if we change our thinking from negative thinking to positive thinking. So getting rid of the self-sabotage will allow you to send more positive chemicals through your body. But much more than that, if we can use the mindfulness that I spoke about at the beginning to find that space, then it allows us to manage or control our emotions far more effectively. So I'm actually going to give you a very quick mindfulness exercise that I found really useful when I was first doing this. So just get yourself comfortable wherever you are, feet flat on the floor if you can, arms by your sides, and just close your eyes. And all you're going to do is to notice your breath. Don't try and change it, but just notice it. And now what I'd like you to do is to see if you can notice the very small gaps between the in-breath and the out-breath. Don't try and change or extend them. Just notice them. And as with any mindfulness exercise, if other thoughts come into your mind, just gently let them drift away. No punishing yourself. And then when you've kind of got the hang of that, just see if you can find that experience of resting in that gap. Just going to do a couple more breaths worth. And just in your own time, just open your eyes and bring yourself back to the present moment. So I would say, experiencing that sense of space is hugely important. I had a real aha moment when I realized that there was a space, a moment in time between an event and my response to it. From that time, I was able effectively to manage my response, to manage my emotions. And it's a really important part of anger management training for a lot of people. I would also say, in terms of emotions, that we self-sabotage when we repress emotions. So none of this is about pretending that the negative feelings aren't there. Absolutely isn't. Mindfulness practitioners would always advise people to sit with an emotion. So if you're sad for something, for a very long time, my daughter lived out in Peru, and I would always feel sad when I left her and came back here. And you just, there's no point pretending you don't. So it's allowing yourself to feel the emotion, to close your eyes, I would always do, experience the emotion, think about where it's affecting you physically, to breathe into the pain, into the sadness, but not allow the negative thoughts, not allow the automatic negative thoughts, the spiral to start. Just experience it, and then give yourself a time to experience it, and then step away from it. You know, I would definitely say that if you have a negative emotion, a profound negative emotion, especially, that you need to experience. You know, what we resist will persist. And I would say you need to become intimate with that emotion in order to move through it. So definitely, I would say we also self-sabotage when we repress negative emotions, but it's making sure that we allow ourselves to feel without going down the rabbit hole of the automatic negative thoughts. The next one, and very important, is we self-sabotage when we have a low self-image. I absolutely love the picture that Andy found for this one. So we are literally hypnotized or programmed by our self-image. It determines the way we obviously see ourselves, but also the way we respond to the outside world. There's nothing likely to be tripping you up more than a negative self-image. Well, there's two things I would say: cognitive bias and negative self-image. The two real biggies. A negative self-image can come from our negative self-talk, which is another form of noise where we blame ourselves for things. It's the I can't do rather than I can do statements that we say to ourselves, often criticizing ourselves much more harshly than we ever would do anyone else. I think a negative self-image can come, especially in this country, because we're conditioned to not boast, to not be arrogant, to be modest. You know, we trade being liked for feeling good about ourselves at a very early age a lot of the time. And I definitely think that we have to accept, like properly accept, that having a low opinion of ourselves is not a virtue, it's a vice, and we need to move through that. Pin your successes, note your accomplishments. It's really important and can really power your continued commitment to change. In terms of self-value, at Mind Fitness, we use the term self-value rather than self-esteem, because to estimate is both relative and conditional. Relative to people around you, and that's particularly damaging at the moment in terms of social media, and conditional. So conditional upon the job that we have, the house that we have, the money that we earn, and that makes us incredibly vulnerable to external events. As we are seeing at the moment, a lot of the people that we're working with in companies where there's mass redundancies going on, you know, they tied their whole value, sense of self around the job. And so when that gets taken away, the whole self-value plummets. There's a really lovely quote by Deepak Chopra that says, you know, when you're happy for a particular reason, you're still in misery, because that reason can be taken away from you tomorrow. So it's always about, instead of estimating, being relative and conditional, it's about unconditional self-acceptance, just accepting yourself as you are. And actually, acceptance is the only way that you can move forward, because unless you really accept where you are at point A, who you are, where you are, how can you possibly plan your journey to point B? So acceptance is really huge. The next one I'm going to talk about is the fact that we self-sabotage when we don't align our goals, our beliefs, and our meaning. And for pretty much anyone who's done any of the Mind Fitness training, you'll know just how important that is to our ethos and our program. You know, we find an awful lot of people who would know what they would see as the meaning in their life, what gives them meaning, what makes them want to get up in the morning, and yet they're doing nothing in their day-to-day life that is anything to do with it. And it's so important to bring those together. So I would definitely say, you know, just have a moment, maybe now, if you can, just jot it down, or if not, come back to it, where you think about what is my meaning in life? What gives my life meaning? And sometimes that will have changed over time and you haven't revisited it for a long, long time. And then from that meaning, try and think about the goals that you can have. How can you personally deliver that meaning? So my meaning is about inclusivity and better mental health. And I run 2 companies. I run Mind Fitness and also Prospero, which is an inclusive theatre company. You know, but I could fulfill my meaning also by being a teacher in a special school or being a fundraiser for a mental health charity. So, you know, you choose the things that you can do best in order to make your meaning happen as much as you possibly can. And I would say, try and think when you're thinking about overcoming self-sabotage, meaning is so important. Try and think about doing something meaningful in your life. You know, tie it in with your meaning. And give, you know, compassion is absolutely huge. So within Prospero, we have a lot of volunteers, and a good few of them, probably more than half, have a disability. And that's largely came from the fact that many years ago, one of our first volunteers, Drew, said, you know, all my life I've had people give to me, and this is the very first time where I can give something back. You know, and we saw the change that made to him, and it really made me think about how we take that for granted, being able to give. And it's such an important thing, you know, doing something that you can be proud of will significantly boost your self-image. And now we're into the last little bit, and I'm going to give you 3 very quick techniques and then the conclusion. So the first quick technique to finish with is simply clearing the path. So, you know, there are many big boulders that will be causing you to self-sabotage. The biggest ones will be negative self-image and cognitive bias, but there'll also be lots and lots of little rocks and pebbles that will be tripping you up. And I would say, you know, clutter is a key one. So that could be physical clutter for some people, or it could be to-do lists that are far too long, or the concept of multitasking, for example. So just have a moment now to think about what you might be able to do to clear the clutter. So having a stop doing list as well as a to-do list is key. And as it says on the screen now, you know, stopping the multitasking. You know, I really used to be a herald of multitasking and try and persuade people to do it. And I feel really awful about it now, because we know now, the science is in, you know, multitasking is absolutely the enemy of good mental health. And it's also the enemy of genius level work, because our brain can't actually do 2 things, not complex things anyway, at the same time. And so when you do 2 tasks, you're actually asking it to switch each time. And every time it switches, it will take a little while to catch up with itself. And until it does catch up with itself, it won't be doing work at the standard that you left it. So, you know, I would say just now where you are, try and think of something that you can do to declutter. So, you know, start the stop doing list. I definitely, I do a cull every Friday now, and it's brilliant. Or just turn off your notifications. So the average at the moment is 35 notifications an hour in business. You know, that is a huge amount of times where your brain is switching tasks. You know, it's an awful lot to ask it. So think of the things that you can do to clear the path. The second one is practicing adaptive behavior. So we build neural pathways every time we think something new. And when we think something a lot, we build a very strong neural pathway. When it's a new thought, it's a very spindly pathway. And generally, it will take about 6 weeks for it to become the strong path, which is what our brain will default to, the route of least resistance. So that's why it takes about 6 weeks for any new thinking to bed in. And during that 6 weeks, for anyone who's given up smoking or drinking or whatever that might be, you'll know how uncomfortable and restless you feel at that time. But after that time, it becomes your route of least resistance and all is well. But adaptive behavior can speed up that process. So adaptive behavior is simply adopting a practice of small but continual change. And it can be absolutely tiny things. It can be putting your bracelet on the other hand, or taking a different route home, or tying your shoes up right and then left, or putting the milk in before the tea, anything at all. But get your brain used to a practice of small but constant, and that's the key, change. And that means that you gradually get more able to embrace bigger change and to cope in a crisis, which is really key. And I would say not being flexible enough in our thinking is a key way that we self-sabotage. And we've seen it, haven't we, in the current situation. And I would also say, we self-sabotage by doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And adaptive behavior will help to stop that. And my last one, which is a kind of gratitude, really, it's about practicing gratitude, but it's with particular reference to relationships. So gratitude, notice what you do have rather than what you don't have. As a mindfulness practitioner, gratitude is massively important. But I'm going to do this exercise today in terms of relationships, because I think, we pretty much all sabotage relationships by being judgmental. And so I'd like you to do this exercise with someone particular in your mind that you feel grateful for, grateful to have in your life, or grateful for something that they've done for you. Just close your eyes. And again, you're going to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, just focusing on that person. And as you focus on that person, I'm just going to make a few statements, and I'd like you to relate them to that person. Everything changes when you start really listening to another person. Everything changes when you stop being judgmental. Everything changes when you stop noticing what the person is doing that's upsetting you. And when you start noticing what they're doing to help. Everything changes when you stop taking things personally. And just opening your eyes. I absolutely love that exercise. I think it's such an important to be grateful, to appreciate other people. It's just such a simple thing, but we are all so judgmental. Mindfulness is about establishing a non-judgmental, compassionate approach to life. I think the whole of the mindfulness stuff that we've talked about and finding that space means that you're much less likely to react to people in a reflexive, spontaneous, way, and much more able to manage emotions, and that absolutely doesn't mean, submitting, it's, assertion, absolutely, because that isn't invested with a negative emotion. Aggression is. And I also think, by practicing gratitude in relation to other people, you heighten your abilities to empathize. So coming into the conclusion, definitely having a success mindset or a growth mindset is hugely about getting rid of the self-sabotage, and we actually, at the moment, the pandemic is like a snow globe. It's shaken everything up, hasn't it? You know, it's forced us out of our comfort zone. And, you know, it's really important, if we can, to see that as a real opportunity. You know, as we always say, you know, we choose to see the world in a particular way, and we choose it every day. You know, it's possible every morning to set an intention, simple intention, that you're not going to self-sabotage that day. I would say to remember that your thoughts and your words affect your nervous system, so your immune system, your physical health. They affect your emotions, the way you feel, and to a very large extent, they define your reality. You know, your power is in your ability to change your thoughts at any time. You know, the slide that we have up a lot is, you know, just because you think something doesn't mean you have to believe it, let alone act upon it. You know, and I still practice that, you know, all the time. You know, there'll be a negative automatic thought that will come into your mind, into my mind, and it's about acknowledging it straight away. Absolutely catch it straight away. You know, usually I can laugh at it. Sometimes I might need a little bit of inner dialogue to challenge it down, but definitely no self-punishing. It's really important that you don't start along the things of, you know, how can you have thought that? What kind of a person would have thought that? You know, because what kind of a person would have thought that? A human person, you know, all of us. We have to accept that and move on. So whatever works for you is brilliant, whether that's a quick mindfulness exercise as the automatic negative thought comes into your mind, or a gratitude exercise, or the stop and catch, or anything else that works for you. But I would say, you know, do it immediately and practice that consistently. You know, change your thoughts in the instant that you recognize it, because choosing to be the person that can do that, you know, is so important, because in doing that, you're choosing to be the person who can live the life that you want. So that's the end of our session. Now I know there's some chat here, but I think what I'm going to do, if this is okay, I'll start reading the chat. And Andy, could you, yes, if you put the slide up so that if anyone can't stay for the Q&A, then they get this. So on the right hand side there is the website, www.mindfitness.training. Lots of free resources there. My email is over on the left. Please do feel free to get in touch with me. And at the top is usetembo.app. So that's the app that I talked about at the beginning. It's not available from the App Store. You just sign in to usetembo.app, and then it works like any other kind of app. And it's in its first iteration. So, you know, it's early days yet. We've got a 10-year plan. But it actually goes to second iteration end of November, and after that there'll be a personal hub that you can store stuff on and track your changes, and a 9-stage wellness course. So lots is actually going on at the end of November. But even now, there's several hundred exercises that I hope will be useful. So I'm just looking at the chat now. Yes. Okay, so there's a couple here. So the first one says, is catastrophizing the same as awfulizing? Yes, it absolutely is. They're different words for the same thing. So a lot of the terms come from CBT, but some of them come from REBT, which is rational emotive behavioral therapy, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and sometimes there's different sort of terminology, but yes, they're absolutely the same thing. Basically, when we think something's a catastrophe or more awful than it is. Yeah. Okay, someone's asked, could I say a word about perfectionism? Yeah, absolutely. I'm a terrible perfectionist. Yeah. Okay, so perfectionist is a cognitive bias. Perfectionism is a cognitive bias. I would say it's pretty damaging. You know, it's so perfectionists will often be procrastinators as well, because they won't want to start anything until the perfect situation is there. Perfectionists tend to put a huge amount of pressure on themselves. You know, they'll see themselves as failing a good deal of the time. You know, and the reason why I think it's, you know, it's a damaging one is it's quite hard to be around, as well as, you know, quite damaging for the person that experiences it. So yes, and I think one of the reasons why it's really prolific at the moment is because on social media we kind of see our role models, don't we? We have we see where we want to go, and we look at the people that have already done it. But because of the way it works on social media, we only see their successes. We don't see the, you know, the half a dozen failures that happened or more before that success. And so we judge ourselves against a finished product. So I would say, you know, one of the key things that you can do to get yourself out of the perfectionism is to give yourself a more realistic target about when you will succeed at something. So when Andy and I first did our very first Mind Fitness workshops, God knows how many years ago, we actually said, okay, we're going to be good at this by the time we do workshop 8. And for this first 7, no one paid. We had invited people there, and we took them out for meals afterwards and got lots of massively good, robust feedback, you know. And so, you know, it's just set yourself, you don't expect to succeed at something the first time is quite a useful thing. Okay, so someone's asked and said you say it's not available in the App Store and you just sign in. So you write use tembo.app on your browser. So sign in on your browser. Use Tembo, USETEMBO.app, and then you'll be straight in. You'll get an email, and then you're straight into the app. I see the webinar is being recorded. Could you watch it again? Yes. So I always send the webinars out to everyone who registers, because you know, the first 2 or 3 we got so many people saying it would be so useful to have it, you know, to be able to show it to different people or to look through it again. So I'll be sending out the recording on Friday, so you'll get it on Friday. Debbie says there's a few actors looking at this. Yes, absolutely. Rejection constantly and tapes in. We never moralizing, difficult to deal with. Yes, so I understand completely as a theatre director who was an actor before going into being a theatre director in my you know, early life. I absolutely understand what that feels like. So we do workshops for performers that are solely for performers, and actually Andy and I are writing a book at the moment for Nick Hearn Books, theatre books, on emotional health for performers. So it is something that we're really concerned with. I would say that there's an awful lot in the whole Mind Fitness process that actors are phenomenally, or creative people generally, but performers are phenomenally good at, because, you know, you're used to constant change. You know, you're used to doing a different job in a different place with a different director. You're used to being in the moment. You know, but I would say there are so many ways in which actors have to be resilient. I mean, it's just incredible, you know, how difficult, and especially at the moment. So you haven't asked me an actual question, I don't think. So this is to Debbie Christie. So if you have a question around performance and around dealing with rejection, so how do you deal with rejection? I would say it's a little bit about what we, you know, what we've just said, and you know, and it's so hard because you it's about making it as easy on yourself as you possibly can. So we of noticing the moments where, in terms of this webinar, where you self-sabotage. So that might be quite specific. So we worked, for example, with an actress who did the audition bit brilliantly and then would always fall to pieces when the director started asking about her character. And I think it's because it actually uses a different part of the brain. And so now she puts down her handbag somewhere away as she enters the room, And then at that moment of transition, she pretends to go to her bag and get a bottle of water or tissue or something, so that it buys her just those 4 or 5 breaths worth to get herself out of fight or flight and back into the best possible space that she can be. So it's good to really think specifically about how you might be self-sabotaging. And in terms of dealing with rejection, you know, I would say that it's establishing a resilient, and resilience is, you know, it's not false positivity. It's always got to be based on rational thinking, but a resilient mindset as much as you possibly can. The whole of the mind fitness process will definitely help with that. Yes. So yeah, Joe Cameron has said, yes, we're used to change and different challenges. What's so tough currently is the creative desert, everything the same, every day, no change. Yeah, I totally, absolutely understand that. You know, I think that, you know, when we worked with performers in the past, the rust out sign over, you know, on the green side of the Buzzburden chart was largely about long runs, when people were in very long runs of plays and they, you know, lost the sense of meaning and purpose in it. You know, and now it's absolutely because of what you say, that every day is the same. And I feel quite conflicted about it. So I have a lot of friends who are actors, and some of them are doing other things at the moment. A lot of them are doing voluntary jobs, you know, and I totally admire that. But I also feel very I don't know, angry that there seems to be the assumption that, you know, people. So one of my friends went on a site the other day to say, you know, what should I retrain as? And I can't remember what it came up as, but it was something absolutely crazy. You know, having said that, I do think as performers that you have, you know, an absolute vast array of transferable skills. But it's a, you know, phenomenally difficult time. You know, and I would say preserve and value your creativity above all else. You know, make sure that you stay being creative, because that is your true inner meaning and identity. Over comparing myself to other people, it's such an easy thing to do. It absolutely is an easy thing to do, you know, especially at the moment you know, with the social media thing. But I'm going to guide you to an exercise on Tembo, if I can. It's called Big I, Little I, and it's an exercise that's designed to build self-value and to help stop that comparing yourself with other people. It's actually designed by a psychologist called Arnold Lazarus, but we have it on Tembo, Big I, Little I, so do have a look for that. I love the science. I love the science too, completely love the science. Could I please just list the gratitude? Oh yes, absolutely, of course I can. So asking for the things that I talked about as you were thinking of the person. I said everything changes when you start really listening to another person. Everything changes when you stop being judgmental. Everything changes when you start noticing what the person is doing to help you and stop noticing what they're doing that isn't helping you. And everything changes when you stop taking things personally. And I, you know, absolutely believe in that. You know, having said that, I think that all of the mindfulness stuff, we often think of mindfulness as being an activity that will only help you, but it absolutely is about being connected to other people and to the world around you. You know, all relationships will get better. And I think this is, yeah, I think I've just got to the end of the last question. But please, if you think of anything else, do email me. You're most welcome. So thank you, my gratitude. Thank you for joining for tonight's webinar. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one, which is on the 15th of December and is on the subject of compassion. So hope to see you then. Thank you very much. Bye.